Hello. In the 1970s, undercover DEA agent Michael Vigil was preparing to embark on a perilous mission, where even a tiny mistake could cost him his life. A week earlier, Mike had met with a brutal Mexican drug cartel. Thanks to the support of a confidential informant, he had pretended that his main supplier had just been killed, and he needed to find a new drug source to supply his hungry customers in the U.S. Now he was about to meet them at a local restaurant to finalize the deal. Mike's convoy consisted of over a dozen Mexican federal agents, all armed with heavy weapons ready to take down any threat. These agents acted quickly and decisively, with no time for small talk. However, Mike, a man born to face danger, understood that a lack of control from the Mexican federal police could result in a ruthless shootout. As the convoy entered the town center, the agents quickly took up strategic positions, prepared to fire at any signs of danger. Mike stopped the car in front of the restaurant, his heart racing as he tried to remain calm and prepare for the worst-case scenarios. He knew his survival depended on keeping a cool head and acting precisely in a highly dangerous environment. Soon after the drug dealers entered, their eyes filled with malice and suspicion. Mike could sense the underlying tension in the air, but he showed no signs of fear. Over the years, he had learned to soothe criminals with polite conversation and a few cleverly placed jokes. This was a high-stakes game, and Mike was playing it with the finesse of a seasoned veteran. He was certain the dealers would demand to see a large sum of cash before agreeing to hand over the drugs. Prepared for this, Mike had cleverly hidden bundles of fake cash, with only two $100 bills wrapping around a stack of smaller denominations. When they asked to see the money, he rolled up his pant leg, revealing the substantial bundles. They glanced over, greedy smiles spreading across their faces. But just as the deal was about to go down, one of the drug dealers pulled out a shiny gold gun, his voice deep and menacing. "If you are a federal agent, we will kill you." The threat hung in the air like a sharp knife, but Mike did not show any signs of fear. He knew that even a drop of sweat or an ill-timed furrow of his brow could cost him his life. As the bargaining continued, the situation outside suddenly took a quick turn. Just as Mike stepped out of the restaurant to wait for the drug truck, everything erupted into chaos. A Mexican federal agent, unable to maintain his composure, burst from his hiding place and aimed his gun at the drug dealer. The dealer reacted lightning fast, grabbing the gun and swinging it toward the agent. A gunshot rang out and in front of Mike. The blood of his comrades splattered into the air. Without thinking, Mike saw the dealer aim his gun at him and fire two shots that barely missed his head. With a swift motion, Mike drew his own weapon and fired back, the bullet piercing the dealer's chest, causing him to stagger, gasping for breath before collapsing to the ground. In the treacherous underworld of Mexico, death lurked around every unavoidable corner. Michael Vigil continued his mission, determined to bring the drug dealers to light. To understand the journey of a courageous agent like Mike, we must start from the turbulent early stages of his career. Michael Vigil went from living in a small town to becoming a renowned DEA agent, starting with a burning dream ignited by his parents. Hardworking individuals imbued with integrity, courage, and a fierce love for justice. Thus, Mike was determined to pursue a degree in criminology and continuously applied to numerous federal and state agencies. His career truly took off when the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, was established on July 1st. 1973, after President Richard Nixon declared a war on drugs. The mission of the DEA was to combat global drug trafficking, becoming the only agency authorized to operate both domestically and internationally. Mike was captivated by the undercover operations of the DEA, where he realized that this job was like a high-stakes game of chess, filled with calculation and risk. This was the beginning of his long journey marked by blood and tears. Mike's first assignment was at the Albuquerque, New Mexico field office. From the very first moment, he sensed danger lurking like a wild beast. In his autobiography, Mike wrote that undercover work was not for the faint-hearted. The mind had to remain alert, sharp and quick enough to react to every unexpected situation. Drug deals were often unpredictable, and drug dealers were always ready to shift the dynamics to their advantage. A single mistake could not only cost him an opportunity, but also his life. One of his strengths was his ability to embody any necessary role, and he was fluent in Spanish. To infiltrate high-level drug trafficking networks, Mike had to immerse himself in their world. He dressed in stylish clothing, wearing expensive sports jackets, Italian loafers, and sparkling diamond rings along with long gold chains. The heroin dealers in New Mexico were seasoned criminals, many of whom had previously served time for drug trafficking. Mike easily blended into their criminal world, honing his undercover skills. He knew how to erase any doubts about his identity as a federal agent, transforming himself into a cold-hearted and ruthless drug dealer. Mike not only spoke their language but also understood their habits, immersing himself in their cunning ways. He constantly walked the line between life and death, facing the risk of exposure every second, yet always managed to escape from the most perilous situations. During one operation, Mike carried a listening device to record negotiations with the drug dealers, but unfortunately, the device's battery leaked and acid began to corrode his stomach. Mike vividly remembered the smell of burning flesh, the searing pain that nearly became unbearable. But he showed no signs of panic, enduring the pain for hours as knowing that if he were discovered, the price would be far more horrific. When forced to try drugs, Mike skillfully declined, making the dealers believe that he was only interested in money and not tempted by addiction. Each time he escaped suspicion, he realized that his luck could run out at any moment. Even a single wrong word could cost him his life. However, over the years, he developed a sixth sense that allowed him to read people in an instant, recognizing life and death signals. In the dark world in which Mike lived, where trust was as fragile as a spider's thread and death lurked around every corner, that sixth sense had saved him more than once. Mike's journey was an unceasing battle between life and death, a fight he was determined never to give up. During Operation Heroin B, Mike painstakingly built trust with many drug lords through his network of informants, individuals who introduced him to key players in the underworld. From there, he began conducting undercover transactions, all aimed at one goal: capturing dangerous criminals. The ringleaders constantly challenged him, interrogating him about every detail of his connections, scrutinizing his past, and grilling him about other drug dealers who could vouch for him. Walking a razor's edge, Mike had to carefully consider every word. Each response needed to be convincing, but not too specific, like a performer in a high-stakes play. He knew that these drug dealers were greedy individuals solely interested in profit, their eyes lighting up at the mention of money, filled with ambition and devoid of empathy. Before entering any dangerous situation, Mike always practiced and adjusted his fabricated story along with the intel he had gathered. He understood that even a small mistake could lead to serious consequences, even death. A memorable operation took place in the mid-1970s when the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, launched Operation Heroin B to combat the wave of drugs flooding into the United States from Mexico. Mike's mission was to take down the largest and most dangerous heroin dealer in the West at the time, James Orlando Quintana. Quintana was not just an ordinary criminal. He ran a tightly organized drug empire with a network stretching from major cities to Mexico. Even other drug lords had to tread carefully around him. Quintana was intelligent and charismatic, capable of manipulating and controlling those around him, like a conductor leading an orchestra. He was born to lead but chose the path of crime instead of righteousness, and his fate would be no less than a tragic disaster. The DEA's investigation into Quintana began with a potential informant who was serving time in prison. Although there was no direct link to Quintana, he could introduce Mike to a low-level smuggler working for him, Henry Gutierrez. This informant was released briefly, and Mike had to closely monitor his every move to ensure no incidents occurred. The situation became tense, and Mike had to maintain his highest level of performance. Eventually, Mike was introduced to Isaac Rubelet, Quintana's right-hand man who executed orders for both Quintana and Gutierrez. The negotiations went smoothly, and a meeting with Quintana and Gutierrez was arranged at a local bar. Although they were suspicious, but Mike managed to convince them that he was a genuine heroin dealer, ready to do business. The DEA decided to use diamonds for the heroin exchange, forcing Quintana and Gutierrez to deal directly with Mike. They collected several diamond rings from a local jeweler, and Mike fabricated a story about having just robbed a jewelry store in New Mexico. Quintana and Gutierrez quickly became engrossed in the exchange, and the transaction was completed. when the DEA coordinated with state and local agencies to execute the arrest. Everything went smoothly, without any resistance. Mike confidently entered the office where Quintana and Rubalid were being held, introducing himself as a DEA agent and marking the conclusion of a highly successful operation, a turning point in the war on drugs. Quintana was released on bail pending trial, but he was determined not to return to prison. After more than a year of searching, the U.S. Marshals, with Mike's assistance, finally located him in a house in Kansas City. When they stormed in, the scene they witnessed sent chills down their spines. Quintana's body lay in the hallway, next to a handgun. He had chosen to end his life rather than return to the cold walls of prison. His reign of terror had come to an end, but Mike couldn't help but wonder, if he had chosen a different path, would the world have seen something better from him? Quintana's legacy would forever be just a shadow of despair and suffering. After many years of service in the U.S., Mike decided to take a greater risk by delving deep into the brutal underground world of Mexico. Driven by a desire to bring criminals to justice, Mike applied to the DEA office in Sonora, Mexico. With an impressive track record, he was immediately selected for the position. However, working in Mexico was not the same as in the U.S. The Mexican Federal Judicial Police, MFJP, was infamous for its corruption and incompetence. From the very beginning, Mike faced a series of obstacles created by other personnel. Some of his intel was intercepted. They lied, saying he wasn't there, and advised people not to call back. Despite this, Mike was determined not to give up easily. He gradually identified a few reliable MFJP officers to collaborate with on drug busts. However, he understood that they were primarily skilled in field operations without much investigative prowess. Thus, the DEA would conduct investigations first and only involve the MFJP when necessary for arrests and drug seizures. Mike always organized drug transactions in public places to minimize the risk of being robbed or kidnapped for ransom. But with Mexican drug lords, their ruthlessness was akin to a game of Russian roulette filled with unpredictability. In one operation, while Mike was hiding in a hotel waiting for news from his informant, there was suddenly a loud knock on the door. Thinking it was his informant, so he opened the door and froze before 8 armed men, all holding semi-automatic weapons. The ringleader, with a deep and threatening voice, demanded to see Mike while the others loomed behind like hungry tigers. In the next room, the Mexican agents were completely unaware of the tense situation unfolding. Mike requested to speak privately with the ringleader. As he stepped into the room, the thug's rough hands patted Mike down for hidden weapons, but he was unaware that Mike had prepared for every eventuality. In that life-or-death moment, Mike remained calm, but the harsh reality hit him when it became clear. These men were the judicial police, and they mistook Mike for a wealthy drug dealer coming to share profits. Realizing the severity of the situation, Mike quickly drew his concealed firearm and aimed it at the officer's mouth, threatening to shoot if he didn't comply. His heart raced as adrenaline surged through him, prompting Mike to burst out of the hotel room and shout for assistance. Once again, luck was on his side. The surprised state police had no time to react, raising their hands in surrender as Mike and the MFJP team disarmed them. It was yet another narrow escape, a testament to the constant dangers Mike faced while working undercover in Mexico. However, if you think working in Mexico was dangerous enough, Colombia was truly an adventure into the lion's den, where death lurked around every corner. After years of facing drug gangs in Mexico, Mike was appointed as the head of the DEA office in Medellin, Colombia, a place where death and violence had become part of daily life. Although DEA regulations allowed agents to serve abroad for a maximum of 6.5 years, but Medellin's reputation as the most violent and dangerous city in the world prompted them to make a special exception. They needed someone experienced like Mike to deal with the horrific situation there. The power of Colombia's drug gangs was like a vast web of violence, with discarded corpses lining the streets as their trademark. In his first week, Mike witnessed horrific scenes: decapitated bodies, blood flowing freely, while passers-by treated the gruesome sights as mere obstacles in their path. Medellin was home to the most notorious gangs led by Pablo Escobar, along with other cold-blooded criminals like Carlos Leder Rivas and the Ochoa brothers. Stepping into this world, Mike understood that coordinating with the Colombian National Police, CNP, was inevitable. The CMP officers lived in constant fear, with a $600 bounty on their heads imposed by Escobar. A stark reminder that their lives were merely numbers. Not wasting any time, Mike immediately sprang into action. One of his early significant successes was the arrest of Harold Rosenthal, a fugitive from the U.S. involved in drug trafficking. This arrest quickly turned Mike into a target for assassination, but what worsened the attacks against him was the raid on the infamous Tranquilandia cocaine processing lab belonging to the Medellin cartel. The raid resulted in the destruction of nearly 14 tons of cocaine worth over $1 billion, sending shockwaves through the criminal underworld. The assassins hired by drug traffickers often used motorcycles to pursue their targets in crowded traffic. They would get close to the victim and open fire at close range. A deadly tactic. One evening when Mike left the DEA office late, he heard the sound of a motorcycle revving up behind him. The bike sped toward him, nearly tailgating his car. Headlights off, a common assassination trick of the Medellin cartel. Two men on the bike glanced at Mike as they passed, with the passenger tightly gripping a gun on his thigh. Mike wondered what had stopped them from killing him in that moment. Perhaps they just wanted to send a message without getting blood on their hands. After a year in Medellin, the U.S. ambassador decided to close the office due to increasing threats from the cartel. Mike moved to Barranquilla, in northern Colombia, where he took on the role of office chief. At this time, he received the devastating news of the brutal death of his close friend, Agent Kiki Camarena, who had been viciously murdered by the Guadalajara cartel in Mexico. When a DEA agent falls, the message from the U.S. government is always clear. If you cross the line with our agents, we will devote every resource to hunt you down and bring those responsible to justice. Driven by grief and an intense determination to avenge his fallen friend, Mike quickly joined the hunt for the criminals, resolved not just to wage a battle, but a life-or-death war. The DEA launched a global manhunt to capture those who killed Agent Kiki Camarena, including notorious criminals like Miguel Felix Gallardo, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, Rafael Caro Quintero, and drug supplier Juan Ramon Mata Ballesteros from Honduras. They expanded phone-tapping operations and activated an extensive network of informants across Latin America, the Caribbean, and Europe. As a result, the DEA discovered Mata Ballesteros' hideout in Cartagena, Colombia. Mata had been on the DEA's radar since 1970 when he was caught with 54 kilograms of cocaine at Dulles International Airport near Washington. However, he had escaped from federal custody and continued to evade the DEA at the last moment. In an operation led by Mike, the DEA monitored Jamie Garcia, a familiar associate of Mata. Eventually, they intercepted a critical conversation. Garcia was calling home to report that the boss was on his way. Mike and his team immediately recognized that Mata was heading for a meeting. They assembled a heavily armed task force preparing for a swift raid on the house. Mata attempted to flee, but couldn't outrun the pursuing agents. He ultimately jumped over a wall and fell to the ground. As he lay on his back, he suddenly pointed a gun at Mike's head, preparing to end his life. But Mike was quicker. He drew his weapon, ready to finish Mata off. However, in that tense moment, Mata exclaimed, "Don't shoot. I can escape from prison, but I can't escape from the grave." An unexpected situation arose when Mata boldly negotiated with Mike, saying, "If you let me go, I'll give you $3 million and the money will be here in just 20 minutes. Despite being in a perilous position, but Mike refused the deal, cuffed Mata, and led him out of the house. On the flight back to the prison, Mata turned to Mike with a challenging look and said, "I want to congratulate you, because for the past 20 years, no one has been able to catch me." Michael Vigil's legacy is deeply etched in the history of the DEA, associated with some of the agency's largest and most successful operations. One of his most notable achievements was participating in drug enforcement campaigns involving 36 countries across the Caribbean, Mexico, and Central and South America. After the events of September 11th and the fall of the Afghan regime, the U.S. faced a new wave of drugs, particularly opiates. To combat this, Vigil designed and implemented a prevention campaign in cooperation with 25 countries, including China and Russia. Although he retired a decade ago as the DEA's International Executive Director, but he continues to advise on counterterrorism and drug trafficking issues. His knowledge and experience have drawn attention from both the government and the media. But behind that public persona lies a man who spent years facing death, living in fear and stress. The name Michael Vigil will forever be inscribed in the annals of the DEA and remains a source of terror for the most brutal criminals he encountered. His legacy is not only one of success, but also of courage in confronting evil, symbolizing a relentless fight that never truly ends.
For a decade, the Guadalajara cartel reigned as an invulnerable empire in the Mexican drug market until Rafael Caro Quintero, one of the most ruthless leaders, made a fatal mistake: the kidnapping, torture, and murder of agent Enrique Kiki Camarena. That fateful moment marked the beginning of one of the largest manhunts in DEA history and ultimately ended the reign of terror of this cartel. However, the story of Kiki Camarena does not end with his sacrifice. It also leads to the tragic fates of others, from a brave Mexican pilot to unwitting witnesses who knocked on the wrong door and 2 innocent American writers who mistakenly stepped into the wrong restaurant. On February 7, 1985, a convoy filled with notorious assassins from the Guadalajara cartel parked right outside the U.S. consulate in Guadalajara, Mexico. They were waiting for Kiki, and as he stepped out of the building, they immediately surrounded him, pushing him into a car in broad daylight and driving him straight to a secret house. That was the last time anyone saw Kiki alive. Kiki Camarena was born on July 26, 1947, in Mexicali, Mexico. He grew up in poverty, and his family immigrated to Calexico, California, when he was just 9 years old. The hardships he faced did not deter him, but instead forged an indomitable spirit within him. After graduating from high school in 1966, he joined the U.S. Marine Corps, serving honorably until his discharge in 1970. Upon returning, Kiki married his high school sweetheart and decided to pursue a career in law enforcement. With his strong sense of integrity, he quickly excelled in his role, starting from undercover work for the Imperial County Drug Task Force to joining the DEA just a year later. This was the moment his life spiraled into an unrelenting battle. Since the 1930s, the French Connection, a massive drug smuggling network, transported heroin from Indochina and Cuba through Turkey to France, and finally to the U.S. Although the U.S. government dismantled this network in the 1970s, but every time one drug route was blocked, another immediately took its place. The flow of drugs from Mexico to the U.S. became a persistent problem between the two countries, especially as the Mexican government struggled to control the powerful drug cartels. In 1973, President Richard Nixon declared a war on drugs and established the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA. This was a golden opportunity for Kiki, as Spanish-speaking agents became extremely necessary. In 1974, he joined the DEA and began his perilous journey. Although Kiki's family, especially his mother, was worried and tried to dissuade him from engaging in this dangerous work, he remained steadfast in his ideals. For Kiki, the fight against drugs was not just a duty but a way of life. He believed that even as one person, he could still make a difference. And it was this conviction that led him into the history books, whether through his life or his tragic death. In 1980, the DEA decided to open an office in Guadalajara, a city becoming the focal point of the drug war in Mexico. A close friend of Kiki convinced him that this was a golden opportunity to advance his career. Unable to resist the allure of a city full of potential and new opportunities, Kiki discussed with his wife the idea of moving there. The mild weather and favorable exchange rate seemed to convince Mika that this was the best decision for their family. But no one could have foreseen that their lives were about to take a dangerous and dark turn. With only a one-way ticket to Guadalajara, Kiki began his journey. In the 1980s, the Guadalajara cartel was at the peak of its power, with influence and reach extending throughout Mexico. This cartel was established by notable names such as Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, Rafael Caro Quintero, and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo. Gallardo, the leader of the cartel, was known as El Padrino for his unprecedented ability to unify drug lords. He focused on profits while the other co-founders, especially Quintero, were more concerned with production and violence. This cartel was responsible for transporting thousands of tons of marijuana from Mexico into the U.S., prompting Kiki to immediately identify his top mission as dismantling this network. The Mexican government collaborated with the U.S. to crack down on the cartel, but the reality was not simple. They allowed DEA agents to be present in Guadalajara, but imposed numerous regulations and restrictions. The agents were only permitted to gather intelligence and were not allowed to make arrests. They could carry weapons only during working hours and could shoot only when attacked. These regulations were imposed under the pretext of ensuring that the agents coordinated closely with the Mexican authorities. However, corruption had deeply infiltrated the system, and much of the information from the DEA was concealed to protect drug lords. Under pressure from the U.S., Mexico was forced to launch a campaign to eradicate opium and marijuana plantations, but as the scale of the campaign increased, the number of plantations soared as well. This was when Operation Trizo was implemented, which included aerial surveillance and crop spraying from planes. One of the pilots involved in this operation was Captain Alfredo Zavala Avilars, Kiki's close friend. In 1982, during a raid, the two coordinated to destroy a vast marijuana plantation of about 200 acres, where hundreds of workers were toiling. Though this blow left the drug lords reeling, but they had no intention of backing down, and neither did Kiki. In 1984, Kiki received information from an informant about a massive plantation in Chihuahua called Rancho Buffalo. He immediately reported to his superiors and requested aerial photos from the Mexican government. However, the photos they received were outdated and did not reflect the current situation. Kiki and Alfredo decided to fly over the farm to take new pictures and confirm the existence of the vast fields with an estimated annual yield of $8 billion. The Mexican government had no choice but to act. They sent 450 soldiers to Rancho Buffalo and completely burned down the plantation. Although such a large plantation surely employed thousands, but very few workers were present at the time of the raid, indicating that someone had tipped off the cartel. This seizure was considered the largest in DEA history, and the drug lords, who once seemed invincible, began to recognize the terrifying threat posed by the DEA. They frantically sought information about which agent had conducted the raid, and that desperation quickly turned into extreme fear. Guadalajara became an incredibly dangerous place, not only for DEA agents, but for all Americans present there. A new war had just begun, and Kiki Camarena was the one leading this battle through its dramatic twists and turns. Earlier that year, Benjamin and Patricia Mascarenas arrived in Guadalajara with the hope of working for a wealthy Mexican family. As Jehovah's Witnesses, they quickly settled into life and invited two of their friends, Dennis and Rose Carlson, who were also from the same faith, to visit. The four friends formed a group to spread their faith throughout the city, knocking on doors, handing out flyers, and chatting with anyone interested in their religion. But on December 2nd, fate had destined them for a tragic end when they knocked on the door of a dangerous man. Ernesto Carrillo, a member of the drug cartel, lived in paranoia, believing that these four Americans were DEA undercover agents. He immediately ordered his men to kidnap them without hesitation. The unfortunate four were taken to an abandoned farm outside Guadalajara, where they were interrogated by none other than Joaquin Guzman, known as El Chapo, infamous for his brutal and bloodthirsty actions. Here, they endured brutal beatings and savage abuse until they were brought to a large grave that had already been dug for them. One by one, they were coldly executed, their blood staining the ground. Not long after, this tragic story extended beyond these four individuals. Journalist John Walker, a writer seeking inspiration for his detective novel, had come to Guadalajara to meet his friend, Alberto Radalat. However, they had no idea that their dinner appointment at a seafood restaurant would turn into a tragedy. This restaurant was owned by the cartel and was prepared for a shady private party that night. A staff member approached them and announced that the restaurant was closed, but when Quintero heard their American accents, he immediately ordered his men to bring them inside. They were led to a back room, where El Chapo tortured them with sharp instruments until one of them, under extreme pressure, confessed to being a DEA agent, although that was not true. After the torture stopped, both were taken to the La Primavera forest, known as a mass grave for the cartel, where over the years, hundreds of bodies had been found. El Chapo shot John on the spot and then wrapped his body in plastic. Alberto was also wrapped in plastic but was buried alive, leaving behind unbearable pain. The deaths of these innocent Americans continued, but the cartel remained relentless in their pursuit of a specific agent they truly wanted to capture. Through an informant, they learned the name of the agent they were hunting: Kiki Camarena. According to the DEA, Caro Quintero ordered the kidnapping of Kiki with the assistance of corrupt officers from the DFS, the Mexican intelligence agency. On February 7, 1985, Kiki left the U.S. consulate to meet his wife for lunch at their favorite restaurant, Camelot. A man flashed his DFS badge and informed Kiki that his superiors wanted to see him. He cleverly stated that he needed to notify his superiors first, not realizing that a trap was waiting for him. Suddenly, Kiki was surrounded by other men who brandished guns at his side and forced him into their vehicle, taking him to a large house at 881 Lope de Vega, where about 50 to 60 people, including politicians, government officials, and drug lords, were celebrating the success of his kidnapping. Kiki was locked in a room where he was subjected to relentless interrogations about the Buffalo Farm, the informants who aided him, and other information. For 2 long, agonizing days, Kiki was brutally tortured. He was mercilessly beaten, burned, and stomped on his back and chest by these vicious assailants. Subsequent autopsy results revealed numerous severe injuries, but it was impossible to determine which injuries occurred before or after his death. In desperate moments, Kiki continuously fell into unconsciousness, but the torture continued, turning him into a victim in a deadly shadowy game he had never anticipated. While Kiki Camarena was enduring these brutal tortures, they brought in a doctor to revive him, injecting his body with drugs that prevented him from ever slipping into oblivion. Each pain tore at his soul while his tormentors continued their questioning. Meanwhile, El Chapo had kidnapped Captain Alfredo Zavala from the airport, and Alfredo was also brought to the same house, where they relentlessly tortured both men, believing that there could be no raid without their support. Eventually, Kiki could no longer endure the pain. His severe injuries had taken his life. They wrapped his body in plastic and did the same to Alfredo, even though he was still alive. Both were then taken to a park, where the Jehovah's Witness group had previously been buried, a secret graveyard. The hunt began, and Quintero was pleased to have killed Agent Kiki. However, his associates knew that the death of a DEA agent would never be overlooked by the U.S. Felix Gallardo, a powerful drug lord, stated in an interview that they never intended to kill Kiki, insisting that anyone who dared to do so must be insane, and he claimed he was not that person. Inevitably, the U.S. government immediately pressured the Mexican authorities. President Ronald Reagan ordered the borders to be closed, creating a massive shock to the Mexican economy. The Mexican government realized they had to act. Just a month after Kiki's kidnapping, the bodies of Kiki and Captain Zavala were discovered by the DEA about 70 miles from Guadalajara. However, suspicious details quickly raised their doubts. There were no signs indicating that this was a grave, and the soil where the bodies were buried did not match the evidence found on the remains. The forensic team concluded that the bodies had been tortured elsewhere and then moved to this location. The DEA believed that the Mexican drug lords, with the assistance of corrupt officials, had devised a sophisticated plan to counter the pressure from the U.S. government. According to this plan, the Mexican authorities would receive anonymous tips that Kiki and Alfredo were being held at the Grupo Bravo farm in La Angostura. This information would then be relayed to the DEA, and in a coordinated raid, the bodies would be found while rival gangs would be eliminated. However, the plan failed miserably because the bodies were not buried in time, and those who were paid to carry out the mission left them on the roadside near the farm. This failure only intensified the fury of the DEA. The La Leyenda campaign was launched, marking the largest drug and murder hunt in DEA history. Agent Hector Perilous was assigned to lead the operation, and ultimately, with the support of the Mexican informant network, He gathered substantial evidence and made a series of arrests related to Felix Gallardo and Caro Quintero. Quintero was the first to be captured in Costa Rica and was extradited to Mexico. Felix Gallardo also fell into the clutches of the law. Both were sentenced to 40 years in prison, but neither was extradited to the U.S. In 2013, a Mexican court shortened Quintero's sentence after he had served only 28 years, but the Mexican Supreme Court overturned that ruling. However, he managed to escape in time. In response, Quintero was placed on the FBI's list of the 10 most wanted fugitives, with a reward of up to $20 million for anyone who could capture him. Ultimately, in 2022, he was arrested by the Mexican Navy once again. Years passed, and the death of Kiki Camarena remained a significant mystery, with many theories proposed, including involvement from the CIA. Agent Perilous, while investigating the case, was informed by a Mexican source about the presence of CIA agents during Kiki's interrogation in the 1980s, a time when the U.S. government was supporting rebel forces against Nicaragua. Rumors suggested that the CIA collaborated with drug lords to supply weapons to the rebel groups in exchange for allowing drug trafficking operations to continue. Kiki may have uncovered this plan, and all those involved feared he would expose the truth, leading them to agree that he had to be eliminated. Unfortunately, after Perilous discovered this information, he was forced into retirement, and his career was left in ruins. Who was really behind the death of Kiki Camarena? Was it the drug cartel, corrupt officials, or the CIA? Everything remains a mystery, but one thing is certain. Agent Kiki Camarena made a significant difference, just as he always hoped. He initiated the largest crackdown in history against Mexican drug cartels. Although he is no longer alive to witness the results, but his legacy will live on in the hearts of many future generations. What do you think about this story? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below so everyone can see. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support me. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.